You're watching Connecting the Dots, reliving Northwood's history with Carrie Bladorn. This old iron horse is decorated for Christmas, bringing holiday cheer to railroad enthusiasts and visitors to Pioneer Park Historical Complex in Rhinelander. But years ago, it was an early industrial-aged beast of burden in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. This time of year, it would have been hauling logs out of the frozen forests, steam rolling, steel ringing, and crews bundled tight against the cold. The locomotive behind me is the Thunder Lake Lumber Company's No. 5 engine, better known as the FiveSpot, and this year it turned 100 years old. Built in July of 1925 by Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the FiveSpot was designed specifically for the Thunder Lake Lumber Company and the rugged demands of northern Wisconsin logging railroads. It was built to pull, not to impress. Small driving wheels, a long stroke, and tremendous tractive force made it ideal for hard work on rough track. With 15 by 20-inch cylinders, 36-inch drive wheels, 180 pounds of boiler pressure, and more than 19,000 pounds of pulling power, this engine was pure railroad muscle. The FiveSpot worked on the Robbins Narrow Gauge Railroad, a 3-foot gauge logging line that radiated out from Rhinelander into Pine Lake, Sugar Camp, and into Forest County. This was railroading at its most practical. Spurs were laid to logging camps, lifted when the timber was gone, and relayed somewhere else. Track was light and often temporary, and locomotives were expected to perform in swamp, snow, heat, and bitter cold. In summer months, No. 5 carried a massive spark arrestor built at Wassa Iron Works to reduce the constant danger of forest fires during the logging season. By the early 1940s, the narrow gauge era in the Northwoods was over. The Robbins Railroad was pulled up, and Thunder Lake Lumber Company sold off its equipment. Rather than being scrapped, No. 5 was sold to a mining operation in Chihuahua, Mexico. There it was renumbered as No. 7 and put back to work hauling ore. During this Mexican chapter of its life, the engine briefly entered popular culture, appearing on screen in the Humphrey Bogart film The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, an unlikely moment of movie stardom for a locomotive built to toil in the woods. That work in Mexico left visible scars. When the engine eventually returned north, it bore the marks of a hard life: a large weld in the frame, a cracked boiler door, and a slightly twisted cab. The return of the FiveSpot to Rhinelander is one of the most remarkable railroad preservation stories in the state. Since the opening of the Rhinelander Logging Museum in 1932, a different engine, Thunder Lake Lumber Company's No. 7, had stood as a showpiece at the museum. Purposefully unfenced, the locomotive became a playground for children that were able to climb in and around it, getting hands-on experience with the great machines of the logging industry. It was said to be the most photographed engine in Wisconsin, but the No. 7 had not began its life here. It was originally built in 1881 for and operated on the Denver, Leadville, and Gunnison Railroad in Colorado, before eventually coming north to work in the woods of Wisconsin. Because of that history, it held deep significance to Colorado rail historians. In the early 1970s, author and railroad attorney Harvey Houston helped locate the original Thunder Lake Lumber Company No. 5, still in Mexico. The Colorado Railroad Museum stepped in and paid all expenses to bring No. 5 back to Rhinelander. In exchange, they received the old No. 7 that had been on display in Rhinelander since the earliest days of the logging museum, returning a Colorado-born locomotive to its home state. For a brief moment during that swap, the old No. 7 and the FiveSpot sat within sight of each other, just as they had once when working side by side in the forests of northern Wisconsin decades earlier. It was a quiet passing of the torch, unnoticed by most, but deeply symbolic of the great Wisconsin logging boom. When the former No. 7 arrived in Golden, Colorado and began to thaw out, pieces literally began falling off. Much of its wood and hardware had rotted away and had been held together by little more than Wisconsin ice and snow. The Colorado Railroad Museum ultimately restored that locomotive completely, rebuilding the cab and placing it on display as the oldest engine in their collection. In February of 1973, Thunder Lake Lumber Company's No. 5 was placed back on the rails in Rhinelander, home at last, in a prominent spot at the Rhinelander Logging Museum in Pioneer Park. Later, it was joined by Rhinelander's historic Sioux Line Depot, now the Rhinelander Railroad Museum. completing the railroad story at the museum complex. Today, the FiveSpot no longer burns coal or builds steam, but it still works. It teaches, it reminds, it stands as a monument to the logging and lumber boom days of northern Wisconsin. 100 years after it was built, the FiveSpot now wears Christmas lights, but it still tells the same story. Northern Wisconsin was built by timber, rail, and hard work, and few relics tell that story better than the old FiveSpot. I'm Kerry Bladorn, and you're watching Connecting the Dots, reliving Northwood's history on Newswatch 12.